Okay, everybody's arriving now. Hi, everybody. You're all very welcome. Got a few waves there.
Hi.
It's welcome to this seminar with Paul of Positive Life and I are presenting it, and I am Jane Stevenson of Seminars.ie, and we are really looking forward to this evening with Eben Alexander. He has put us straight on the pronunciation of his name. It's Eben Alexander, because I got that wrong in the beginning. We do have still people coming, so we're going to just have a sort of general chat now before we start, because we've got quite a big group this evening. We've got over 60 people anyway. So we're going to just let people come in slowly for the next few minutes. And I think you're probably all quite familiar with Zoom at this stage. If you've got questions, we are going to have a session. We're going to give the ability for questions, because I think a lot of you will have questions for Eben and his work. So if you put your questions in the chat box, and then Paul and I will manage to get to them, and we will present them to Eben as the evening goes on. So the format is basically Eben will speak about his near-death experience, which I think many of you will have. How many of you have read the book Proof of Heaven?
Duh.
I think
Sorry.
probably.
Can you hear me, Jane?
Quite a few of you, yeah. I think probably. I don't. Who is that talking? I can't see.
Liz, thank you for all your emails, Jane. Just before the 100 people get here, thank you.
Oh, Zach. Hi. Are you Zach?
Liz Ramus Anderson.
Oh,
Remember,
Liz.
Okay. Wear a Groucho Marx mask.
Oh, the Groucho Marx.
A funny one. Yeah, kind of strange. Haha. Anyway, yes. Hello and thank you, and I'll be quiet now.
Okay. Thanks very much, Liz. And Paul and I had a good laugh about your email.
It was quite fun.
Yeah, you all made me laugh too. Hey, Paul.
Nice to see you.
Just to let you know, Eben, Liz wanted to wear a Groucho Marx mask because she's very private.
Good.
But
that's a perfect way to do it.
Good. I thought I'd pull focus from you, so I just couldn't do that. This is your event, so I didn't want to pull focus. So
well, thank you. Maybe I should have worn the Groucho Marx.
No. Emergency facelift, and you know, this is all spackle, and it will all fall in about 2 hours because I'm somewhat vain.
Just keep it together for 2 hours. That'll do you.
Oh my God! The Xanax is here, and my guides are on the right. So hi, Paul. Cuter than I thought you'd be. Okay.
I see a few familiar faces here. Hiya, Mark. How are you, Mark? Nice to see you. And I'm sure there are many more. But I've got a chat here, a question here.
That's an early question. That's very good.
Well, that's the first question, but do keep putting questions in, because I've already got a few in my notes as well. So, Paul, where are we at now on numbers?
I think we're ready, good to go, because we're 52 now, so I would kick off. Yeah.
All right. It's a good time. Now, as you all know, probably, if you don't want to see everybody's faces, you can go to speaker view, and then you'll just see Eben and then Paul and I when we ask questions. So you just suit yourselves on that. Please mute yourselves. Liz, I notice you're not muted. We just have to have everybody muted.
The story of my life. I will mute myself, my friend. Here I
go. We don't want background noise.
No, God no. And I breathe very loudly. And so here we go.
Okay, there you go. Well done.
Good work.
So if everybody's here, I will introduce Eben. And as I say, he will then introduce what his experience, and then we'll come round to a more of a conversation and then questions, because I know many of you have very many questions. So Eben is a neurosurgeon, and he was a physician. He was an associate professor at Harvard Medical School. He was taught at teaching hospitals. Very interestingly, he was very much a scientist. He was staunchly committed to the materialist worldview, which I think many doctors and neurosurgeons and people in his position were, the belief that the physical world is all there is. However, in 2008, he had a transcendental near-death experience when he was diagnosed with meningitis of the brain. And this was an odyssey, he calls an odyssey into another realm during a week-long coma. And despite a bleak medical prognosis, the doctors all said that they thought he would not come back. And they couldn't believe that actually he was going through this experience while he was in a coma. He came back to full health, and he recounted his experiences in his book, Proof of Heaven. So I think since then, that was 2008, since then he's written several other books, the most recent being Living in a Mindful Universe. And he speaks around the world to talk about the role that consciousness plays in wellness, healing, and recovery. So over to you, Eben, and then we'll come back to you and continue the conversation with you.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Paul and Jane. It's great to be with everyone here. I wish I were actually in Ireland, but I'll have to settle for Virginia right now. So getting back to kind of my original story, important to point out that I had grown up in a very scientific family. My father was an academic neurosurgeon, but he also had a very strong belief in God and power of prayer, and that fit just fine with his science. Like many who grew up in the 60s and 70s, I always knew science was a pathway to truth. And for the first 54 years of my life, I really mistakenly thought that materialist science, was a valid expression of science. And I've since come to realize it absolutely is not. In fact, materialism was disproven as a theory of reality probably 80 or so years ago with the advent of quantum physics. And that's a topic we can get into much later. But materialism should have died off to anybody doing their homework. And now, luckily, a lot of scientists are doing their homework. So at any rate, November 10th, 2008, I woke up with severe back pain, soon realized I had a horrific headache. Of course, anyone in medicine, you hear of sudden onset of headache, back pain, you would think meningitis. Well, the doctor was already out. My brain was being overrun by an extremely aggressive and primitive and should have killed me bacterial meningoencephalitis. And it turns out that's what sent me deep into coma. I mean, my family just witnessed me going into grand mal seizures and being unresponsive. And that's when they called 911. I was whisked off to the hospital where I had worked for 2 years as a neurosurgeon. In fact, the admitting ER doc who examined me did not initially recognize me. All she heard from the nurses was 54-year-old white male, status epilepticus in extremis, that is trying to die right there in her ER. And then when she recognized me, she was absolutely shocked. Right now. Yep. So at any rate, and that was the beginning of the journey for me. The rest of that week, I was not anywhere remotely around this world. I was far gone from here. It was not like I was lapsing in and out of coma. I was deep in coma the entire time. And this is where the whole thing gets very interesting because, in fact, my medical records are very clearly of someone who was so deathly ill from a type of meningitis that actually E. coli meningitis almost always happens in newborns, very rare beyond the age of 3 months. So my doctors had that big mystery. How could a 54-year-old male be suffering from something that almost always afflicts newborns? And I think that was part of the kind of wink nudge of the universe. I was going back to the very beginning in terms of my own understanding of reality with kind of a childlike fascination as I went through this journey. Now, one thing important to point out, an atypical feature of my near-death experience is the fact that I was amnesic. I had no memory of Eben Alexander's life. I had no words, no language, none of my personal memories, none of my religious beliefs, knowledge of Earth or this universe. Everything was gone. It was a completely empty slate. Now, when I first came back to this world and in the weeks of recovery was writing it all up, I explained all that complete loss of memory because I was beginning to glean the medical facts of my case. And the medical facts were of all lobes of my brain affected full thickness with this incredible infection. That's what the MRI and CT scan showed. The lab values, the neurologic exams, I mean, my Glasgow Coma Scale, which in you or me right now would be 15. Glasgow Coma Scale, or GCS, I'll call it, in a corpse would be 3. Anything below 9 is deep coma. And for the vast majority of that week, I was a 6 or 7. At times, I was as low as a 5. So I was in deep coma the whole time. And given that extensive documentation of damage to my entire neocortex, that's where my story became very interesting to me in the months and early years after my recovery, because there was no way that brain was able to produce a dream, hallucination, confabulation. Every bit of that would have demanded at least some part of the neocortex was still functioning. And yet mine was very demonstrably offline. That has actually been confirmed and validated very powerfully by a case report that came out in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September of 2018, so almost 10 years after my coma. That case report was written by 3 doctors who were not involved in my care, but were absolutely astonished by my miraculous recovery. And that case report is available. If you go to ebenalexander.com, to my website, the blog posting for September 2018 has all the details there, plus the case report available via the link. But anyway, that was kind of the mystery I faced, because when I first came back to this world on day 7 of coma, my brain was still so wrecked, I did not even recognize loved ones at the bedside. My mother, my sisters, my sons, my former spouse. I had no idea who these beings were. And that is something that's very important to understand. This was not just a mild case of meningoencephalitis. This was an absolutely lethal case. In fact, when the peer reviewers of that medical journal challenged the people who wrote the case report, how do you explain this? This kind of medical record does not equal somebody who makes a full recovery. These patients die, or at best are wrecked for life. And in fact, the 3 physicians who had written it up said, well, it's because he had a near-death experience that he had this miraculous recovery. And that was good enough for the peer-reviewing medical editors. They accepted the publication for that reason. And that's why I think the case is so important, as are other cases of NDEs with such miraculous healing. But now I want to briefly describe what it was that I remembered. And of course, those of you who have read Proof of Heaven, you've already seen kind of an expansion of this, but there's much more of the story than I was even able to put in the book. And you can glean that from the many, many interviews I've done. But basically what I knew when I first woke up in that ICU bed was this incredible journey. It began in what I call the Earthworm's eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. It was like being in dirty jello. I have a strong memory of roots or blood vessels or some tactile sensation all around me. There was never a point anywhere in my 7-day coma where I had any kind of body awareness. There was never a sense of body, of hands, arms, vision, things like that. I was always just a speck of awareness kind of monitoring what was going on around me. And although that Earthworm eye view sounds kind of foreboding, and if I had just come back from that part of my journey, I probably would have had what people describe as a hellish NDE or a negative NDE. 3 to 5% of those in the literature are kind of negative and frightening, scary. The amazing thing is the vast majority of them are absolutely beautiful, astonishing, like a true spiritual home. And that was what I encountered in the next levels of my journey. What happened there was there came out of the muck of this Earthworm's eye view, as I call it, came the slowly spinning white light that had silvery and golden tendrils off of it. And it came packaged with a perfect musical melody. Music and melody becomes a great theme for my journey, because I found that by remembering notes of a melody in my mind, I could actually navigate these spaces, going from one level to another. And so initially those musical notes and the melody ushered me up through this light portal into this brilliant ultra-real gateway valley. That's a very difficult part to explain to people, and yet it had a lot of earthly features. So that kind of it fits with our words and our language. And in that gateway valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. And the butterfly was of colors far beyond the rainbow, just amazing colors. And in fact, my first knowing of it was just this amazing fluttering of color. Could have been a magic carpet, could have been anything. But what I called it as it kind of evolved in this journey was a butterfly. And it turns out it was accompanied by millions of other similar objects that were looping and spiraling in these vast formations. And below us was this amazing valley, just absolutely lush with life, surrounded by these dense forests. And it was just filled with blossoms, buds on trees, flowers, everything in these dynamic kind of blossoming fashions, but no sign of any death or decay. I mean, in many ways, it was like Plato's world of ideals, but for the individual soul. And that's what I believe, is the part of the realm that welcomes all of us as we go over. That's, for example, where we would reunite with our higher soul, with souls of departed loved ones, go through life reviews, plan next incarnations, all the incredible things that happen in that realm of spiritual existence. And I remember the best part about it, excuse me, was that I wasn't alone. There was a beautiful young woman who accompanied me on that butterfly wing. And in the readings weeks and months later, I came to realize she was my spiritual guide, or guardian angel, as I called her in some of my writings. And I'll never forget her soft brown hair framing her lovely face, high forehead, high cheekbones, broad smile. She never said a word. She never had to, because her emotional truth came into me telepathically. With this look of pure love. And that message to me was, I think, the central message I was to bring back for this world through Proof of Heaven, one of the main reasons I shared the story. And of course, it was not delivered in words. There, it's just pure conceptual flow and knowing. But when I wrote it all up weeks later, her message to me: you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are cared for. And the other part was, you can do no wrong. And I wish I'd explained that better in Proof of Heaven, because some people don't kind of get it at that point. I've come to realize at that point in the journey, this incredible sense of love and power, and how love is what really governs the universe. And therefore, what I realize is, you can do no wrong means you have free will. We are gifted with true free will. That's an extraordinary ingredient and worthy of discussion in its own right, given that the materialist science that I had worshipped before my coma, I don't use that word lightly, but materialist science will try and insist no one has free will. It's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, following all the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, that there's no place to insert any kind of free will. But I came back realizing, of course, that free will is absolutely essential, that this entire universe exists for the expression of free will by sentient beings. And that's why it's so important for us to get to a much deeper level of understanding of our relationships with each other and with the universe at large. But getting back to my story, that was how it was delivered to me. You can do no wrong. My understanding of it at that time was very clear. But don't misinterpret that, because if we choose a pathway away from love and kindness and compassion, we're choosing a much more arduous path because of the life review that is involved. Because the life review is interesting. Two of the biggest features it demonstrates to us: one is that your boundaries of self are part of the fiction of living in this body, in this realm. But then in that realm, we start to have this overlap of consciousness. And people often describe a life review as being from the emotional perspective of those around us. So we go back through the main events of our life, but we have the life review that is perspective of others. So if we've been busy hurting, causing pain and suffering to others, in that life review, we get to see what that feels like. It comes back at us. It's a beautiful way of saying that the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe in the form of this life review, which occur in probably 50% or more of near-death experiences reported across all belief systems and going back thousands of years. Now, it turns out that back in my journey with this beautiful woman on the butterfly wing, I also witnessed thousands of beings dancing in the meadow below. and they were wearing very simple but incredibly colorful garb. And there was lots of joy and festivity and merriment. I mean, one cannot express how beautiful and just a home, a true spiritual home, this place was. It was very comforting. I mean, when you go through hundreds and thousands of near-death experiences, you'll find such descriptions of beauty and people saying they don't want to come back. It's absolutely captivating and an incredible adventure to go through. And it turns out that all of that joy and merriment was being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of angelic choirs that were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would just thunder through my awareness, this incredible power and majesty, and yet all of it filled with love, connection. I mean, it really brings tears to my eyes to even remember some of the most beautiful aspects of this journey. And there was a point there where, especially early on, as I was just beginning to absorb this beautiful scene around me and being on this butterfly with all these souls dancing below and all that, where a soft summer breeze blew through. And although my description of the elements would not really change very much, my awareness and my emotional truth grew much richer through that. That breeze, I referred to it in my later writings, the writings weeks later, as divine wind or the breath of God. That was my first awareness of the divine. And from that point on, the journey really accelerated and expanded tremendously. You often hear that these kind of experiences are ineffable. They're beyond our capability of language. And part of the reason for that is in these bodies living in the material world, our eyes, our ears, our brains, sensory modalities, every bit of it is designed to restrict our awareness of surroundings down to this tiny little trickle of an apparent here and now, and a sense of self that, as I've said in the Life Review, is revealed to be fictional, that in fact we're all sharing the dream of the one mind in many ways. Now, at this point in the journey, my awareness also realized that all of kind of the material realm and the lowest kind of densest realms of existence were shrinking down. And then this much more expanded spiritual realm with a completely different ordering of causality. Very important to point out, time flow there is not like time flow here. And so a Life Review, the other major thing to point out, other than that it is a demonstration of our sharing a dream of one mind, that is the emotional perspective of others and its importance. The other thing you realize is it's not a vague sepia-tinted memory of life events. You relive them in great detail. And so it's showing us that at that level of spiritual reality, our entire lives can be presented to us in different fashions. It's just a power of that part of the universe. From that, what I witnessed was this collapsing down also of that spiritual realm and its different causal ordering, what I call deep time. Deep time is what allows for you to relive events in that demonstration of Life Reviews, and also allows for the evolution of all consciousness, which I believe is what this whole process is all about. And that deep time is a very important concept. And it allows, especially when people get confused about various paradoxes, say, for example, in discussions of reincarnation, there are concerns that a loved one might reincarnate before they leave the physical plane and are welcomed to that realm by their loved one who's already left. That does not happen. That's what deep time allows, is to express the importance of relationships. This whole universe exists for our relationships with others, for sentient beings to go through these experiences together for learning and teaching. Now, back to my journey, the angelic choirs provided another musical portal. So as I saw all this collapse of the material world and then that spiritual realm with deep time, all of it collapsing down, and I witnessed multiple shells of this until I was in what I call a core. The core, infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with that divine energy of healing power and love, that God force. And I realized, certainly in coming back from multiple passages through these levels, that God force, to debate over whether you want to call it God, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Allah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. I don't care what word you use. everyone is referring to the same deep and profound sense of connectedness and love, mercy, compassion, kindness. That is the ruler of that realm. And in our religious systems, we might try and divide it all out, parcel it all out, bicker about differences in ideology and orthodoxy. And yet the deeper truth, as revealed from near-death experiences, is really one of this infinitely loving and healing God force at the core of all reality. In fact, I would say none of us is ever separate from that at all. In fact, my awareness in the core realm was really of my very conscious awareness is being sourced in that same infinitely loving God force. And it's only as that kind of percolates out into these lower and lower levels that we get those kind of tinctures of like evil and apparent anomalies and darkness. And as I described in Proof of Heaven, those are basically impurities that allow for all of this growth and transformation to occur, but that the vast majority of the universe is completely awash in this unifying sense of love and connection. And that's one of the most important lessons that the NDE community is here to teach this world, because the world has obviously gotten fairly fragmented, and it's time to really come into some deeper truth about our unification. Now, in that core realm, I was told when I first entered there, when surrounded by this infinite dimensional space and witnessing that multiverse, basically, I witnessed all of this shrinking down. And it was a complex overspheres there as part of the lessons I was to be taught. And I was told, though, you're not here to stay. You'll be going back. We'll teach you many things. And that was what I went through in that core realm. So many of the lessons that I often talk about, again, since I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life, there was no way to have an Eben Alexander life review, which, of course, to me means that my journey was incomplete. In many ways, but that was done to help me understand some deeper facets of the journey. And so, for example, I didn't have an Eben Alexander life review because of my amnesia, but I did witness life reviews and reincarnation very strongly in two powerful visions. One that involved what I call the flying fish vision, where we were fish down in the water, was down the material world, temporarily dumbed down, not remembering between lives, past lives, not privy to the knowledge of our higher soul. And then, of course, when we die, leave the physical body, we pop back up into the air as flying fish. That's where we reunite with loved ones, go through life reviews, plan next incarnations, then dive back in, and then the program forgetting. You know, the scientists who study past life memories in children will tell you have to harvest those memories before age 5 or 6, because they're spontaneous processes that cover them over. So that as adults, we generally don't remember that kind of thing. Although as children, it's not uncommon to be able to uncover between life and past life memories. And then the other vision was what I call the Ender's Net vision, which was much more complex, which was a much later passage through the core, but involved this incredible vision of an infinite dimensional space with all these interwoven threads that were woven together, and that was showing me our individual lifetimes, you know, and it was almost like breathing, to be incarnate, go through these lessons together, learning and teaching, because this world is where we actually make progress in souls. And then the exhale was between lives, going through life reviews, planning next incarnations, what lessons to learn and teach next time around, and then diving back in. So anyway, but the core realm was where so many of these lessons occurred, but then I would spontaneously tumble back down to that earthworm eye view, to that very primitive starting place where it all began. And the good news is I learned early on by remembering the musical notes, the melody, that enabled me to conjure up that light portal that enabled me to ascend back into that ultra-real Gateway Valley. And ultra-real, I use that word because, as I mentioned earlier, you know, our modalities of sensory, you know, analysis and everything in this world are very limited and constricted. In that world, we have knowledge through identification, where we become huge swathes of the scene. It's one of the reasons why it's almost impossible to put into words in any sensible fashion what occurs in those kind of journeys, because the channels of information flow are so gigantic. At any rate, I would then go through that beautiful reunion with my guardian angel. Her message to me always affirmed, you're deeply loved and cherished, you have nothing to fear, and then back into the core realm for more. Now, this cycle happened multiple times. I don't know how many, but there did come a time, as they told me, in the core, you're not here to stay. Where, in fact, I remembered the musical notes of the melody, but they no longer conjured up that light portal. To say I was sad at that point would be a vast understatement, but I could also trust. I knew that I would be taken care of. And that's when I was aware of thousands of beings going off around me into the distance, heads bowed like that, many holding candles, arms up like this, and this murmuring energy coming from them was hitting me in this amazing way, because it was reminiscent of the beautiful love and unity I'd sensed in those higher levels, in the Gateway Valley and in the core. And yet it was coming from these beings. And that was what was kind of attracting me back to the earthly realm. And I call that the power of prayer in my early writings, because that's what I sensed this energy coming from them was. And then at the very end of the journey is when I saw 6 faces. It turns out 5 of them were very important because they were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours I was in coma. And they served as what we call veridical time anchors, proving that the vast majority of the coma journey happened between days 1 and 4, possibly days 1 and 5 of the coma, but not extending into day 7. And that's important, especially because of the medical case report and the medical data that showed my brain was absolutely savaged during that time and had no way whatsoever of putting up any kind of elaborate dream or hallucination. And I experienced something that was more elaborate, complex, meaningful, and powerful and detailed than anything I've ever experienced in my life. How could that happen if the brain and neocortex are so important in generating conscious awareness? And the memories of it are as sharp today as if they just happened yesterday morning. And in Proof of Heaven, I talk about at the very end, there was another face was Susan Wrenches. She was a family friend. I don't have time to go into detail there, but she had worked with by channeling to help patients in coma before. And my family was aware of that. That's why they contacted her and asked her to help. And she channeled to me on nights 4 and 5 of my coma. But it was the 6th face that really got me to come back here. And that was the face of my 10-year-old son, Bond. Now, my memories were still not there, so I had no idea who this being was. It was day 7 of coma, Sunday morning. The doctors had just held a conference saying I'd gone from a 10% to a 2% chance of survival over the week, but with no chance of recovery. There were no cases in the medical literature of anyone recovering from such a severe case of bacterial meningoencephalitis caused by E. coli. So at any rate, Bond heard that news, and they protected him from the worst news during the week, but he heard this, and all of a sudden he realized, oh my God, this is horrible. Running down the hallway into my ICU room where I was on the ventilator. I'd been on for 7 days now. He pulled open my eyelids that were taped shut, one eye looking over there, one eye looking over there, neither pupil working. Those of you in medicine know that's a horrible picture. But anyway, he was pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. So if somehow that would make it so. I did not understand the words. I did not see him with my eyes nor hear him with my ears. I was very far gone from this physical universe. And yet the message got through. All through this journey, I had thought this can continue, it can cease, doesn't matter. I didn't have any buy-in. That's why I never had any fear around any of the things that I described. And yet now there was fear, because I knew I had a responsibility to another soul. And that somehow I had to figure all this out. I had to will myself back. And that's when I made the decision to come back to wherever he was. And that's when I started returning to this world. It's one of the toughest things I've ever done. It was like crawling out of a gravel pit where every time I reach up, everything just caves in around me. It seemed to be impossible. And yet with that profound will of having to help him, that's what energized my journey back to this world. And that's when I opened my eyes in that ICU room and started fighting the ventilator. That's when they took it out and I said, thank you. And my first words were, all is well. Don't worry, all is well. Over the next week or two, memories of language came back over hours. Childhood memories, other distant memories of life came back over a week or two. All my semantic knowledge of cosmology, physics, neuroscience, etc., returned over about 2 months' time. In fact, after the memories returned, they were more complete than they had been before coma. That's one of the most shocking features of it. In our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we discuss a lot about memory and how the fact that modern science is finally getting to a point of realizing memories are not even stored in the brain is a crucial part of this deeper understanding. But I've spent the 13 years of my life since all that occurred, working with scientists around the world, working with thousands of other experiencers, presenting at over 500 meetings, conferences, etc. This is all about a revolution in our understanding of the scientific nature of reality, and the world will become a far better place when this message of unity and the sharing of the one mind can really get out to this world in major fashion. I use meditation to return to these realms, and often in our workshops make the point that people can come to know these realms and these truths of an afterlife through a dedicated program of meditation. And that's something we can certainly discuss as we go on, but I'd like to just close it there and open it up to our conversation, and then open to questions from the group.
Great. Wasn't that fantastic? That was just so brilliant. Thank you, Eben. That was brilliant. Such a
Thank you.
detailed description of your experience. So now let's get into a bit of a dialogue with some people and see what people have to ask. I'm Paul from Positive Life. I know some of your faces out there. I just want to say hello to you all. I've seen some familiar faces. Good to see you all. And me and Jane now are going to alternate and just go through some of the questions that pop up here. So the first question is from Deirdre, and Deirdre is asking, do you differentiate between the subconscious and the unconscious mind?
Well, one thing I've learned in all of this is I'm much more of a lumper than a splitter when it comes to definitions. And part of it is I've come to realize the kind of oneness and unity of the universe, and how the more we split pieces out, the more we're just not really understanding it. I often, in a discussion of consciousness, will talk about conscious, that is what we are aware of, you know, at any point in kind of our existence. So there's the consciousness, and then there's what I would just call the unconscious. And that is, you can demonstrate psychologically that there's a tremendous amount of material. In fact, probably some of our best thinking is done at an unconscious level. And I don't really like splitting out unconscious and subconscious separately. But the other thing I would point out, and of course the dream space, there are many ways that our unconscious can kind of impinge on our consciousness and help in our processing and understanding. And then there also is this wonderful concept of primordial mind, of the kind of God force, the God mind that I would say is the source of it all. And that's something that we can access as sentient beings through meditation, centering prayer, through spontaneous epiphanies. I think we can access little teeny pieces of it through psychedelic drugs, but I am a huge fan of using meditation, not psychedelics, for that purpose, because I think the psychedelics cause such a huge splash, but they do give us a teeny glimpse through a keyhole into that kind of grander consciousness, the collective unconscious that Carl Jung talked about. So that's really the way I'd prefer to split it all out and say that the brain is something that allows that primordial consciousness to manifest, because the brain is a filter, a transceiver, that in the physical universe allows certain of these states to exist. And I mean, in point of fact, the states are dominated by the mental realm. The mental realm of the universe is what dictates all of what unfolds here. And as sentient beings, we have access to that mental realm. But that involves consciousness, the unconscious, and that primordial mind consciousness, all told. So I hope that helps a bit.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks, Eben. The next question is, do you have knowledge about material objects being sent by spirit loved ones who have passed?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a beautiful story that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross tells. I think it's on her book, On Death and Dying, or Life After Death. I believe that's where it is. And I'm sorry I don't recall all the details, but she tells a story. I think it's on page 29. For some reason, that comes to mind. I know because page 28 is very important to me. I think it's right after that. But in this story, she was visited by the writing partner oh gosh, I don't want to mess this up, but the essence of it is that she was, I'm sorry, she encounters a woman when she is visiting someone very important to her, and in the hallway she encounters this woman, and she recognizes that the woman is actually someone she knew very well who had passed over a few years earlier. And the woman comes up and tells her, it was at a time when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was getting very tired of her workshops in after death and all that, and she was very frustrated. She was getting a lot of pushback from people, etc. She was getting ready to give it all up, essentially. And this woman appeared to her and was physically as real as could be. And because of that recognition that it was someone who was passed, she said, my gosh, she was going to honor whatever she said. The woman said, continue what you're doing. It's very important work. And then Elizabeth said, well, you've got to leave me a note. And so the woman wrote a note and signed it with the name of that woman that she knew had passed over years ago. That had not been covered in the current conversation, but then it confirmed that it was exactly who she thought it was. And she kept the note. It was a physical piece of evidence that was conveyed to her by, an apparition of someone, but in the real world as a real person. That's how real it was to her, but she knew that she'd already died. But to me, that's an extraordinary example. And Kubler-Ross said she would always pick that note up whenever she needed a reminder that she was on the right path and to keep going. So yes, there's no question in my mind. I've heard other stories, but that one just really comes to mind as a powerful example of physical evidence that can be left behind from spiritual beings in this physical world to help keep us, kind of aligned with the lessons in the mission.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, great question and great answer. There's a question here from Nora Eben. Could you possibly talk about, and this is a fascinating one actually, because I hear this a lot about NDEs. Did you experience any depression after your NDE? Nora is saying there's not much information about it, but she experienced an NDE in 2019, and recovering from depression afterwards was a big part of her recovery. I'd love to hear if Eben has any insight on this, please.
Well, I would say that I've talked with thousands of near-death experiencers over this decade plus, and depression is quite common after an NDE, especially because people want to share it, but they're not sure. People think they're crazy. They don't know if they can share it. It can be frustrating to people. I never hit a point of depression, and I think part of it was because this aligns so well with kind of my life journey. My life journey is, a neurosurgeon trying to understand consciousness, brain, mind. So in so many ways, my NDE offered me tremendous information that contributed to what I consider to be kind of my purpose in life. Now, it greatly expanded it beyond anything I could have imagined before my coma. But in many ways, that has helped me because even when I've faced, doubters and pushback from the world and, people trying to destroy my reputation through false accusations, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's a little, frustrating, but never to the point of depression. And for me, I've also meditated a lot, and meditation is one incredibly powerful way to live with your higher soul. And, depression is something that I would often attribute to kind of ego issues and ego problems, like addictions, alcoholism. They're all kind of ego diseases. But especially with the meditation, which I started to do every day roughly, beginning about 2 years after my coma, it's a beautiful source of energy and groundedness that really, I'll have blue moods, but never anything I would call depression, and certainly not in the context of thinking about my NDE and its aftermath. But don't worry, that depression is a very normal response, especially when you get pushback from the world, or you're worried you can't share it, or you miss it. A lot of people get homesick for that realm. They just remember how beautiful and comforting it is. But my recommendation is prayer and meditation. They can do a world of good for helping us to reconnect to that world. In fact, the workshops that Karen Newell, my partner and co-author of that third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, Our workshops are all about helping people who haven't had NDEs have deep spiritual journeys through meditation.
Okay, thank you, Eben. Your very comprehensive answers. And we've got some really good questions coming through. There are quite a lot of questions. Here's another one from Zach. Has anyone ever explained why you had the earthworm view and did not go directly into the light?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, for a while, in those early months, as I was first putting this together, I was shocked by the memories, even more shocked as I was going back to talk with my doctors, reviewing medical records, neurologic exams, CT scans, lab values, because this didn't line up. This guy was way too sick to have had any kind of experience where he could come back fully. And that was a deep mystery to me. But initially, I explained that Earthworm view. I thought that was the best consciousness that my brain could muster soaking in pus, and that the lesson was that these higher realms were a journey into real consciousness that was not just the kind of little version that's generated in our material bodies and brains while we're in this world. But in the early reading, one of the earliest books I read was the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and they talk about the Bardos regions, and that's part and parcel. That's, you know, I believe that's kind of what I passed through. And I came to realize in conversations with other NDEers that that kind of realm was not uncommon. And it's really instructive to read the Buddhist, kind of Tibetan Buddhist take on all that, because the kind of demons you run into there, they ultimately are just describing as alternate facets of self, of higher soul, that are there to kind of reflect and help you in processing and moving up in this journey. So I came to realize the Earthworm's Eye view, I think, is a fairly standard way for people to get in there. And it might have been labeled by people over time purgatory, something like that, you know, kind of a waiting zone. I know in some of the early meditative work I did with the Monroe Institute back in 2011, we would actually do meditations to rescue souls who were stuck in that kind of a purgatory. And I think it has to do with belief systems. And if people, for example, if somebody has a staunch kind of atheistic, militant, materialistic beliefs, potentially they could get stuck in that realm. And, you know, I wouldn't say that I was absolutely stuck to my materialist beliefs. I was open-minded. And so in many ways, I think I was allowed to traverse up and follow my own pathway. But I would say that Earthworm Eye view is not just my little experience and not so related to my brain soaking in pus, but was actually something that is much more commonly encountered by people. But, you know, it takes all the different levels to start to come to some understanding. It's not just some simple, you know, you get to heaven and you got pearly gates and you're playing a harp on a cloud and there's a guy there with a big gray beard. You know, that's not the way it works. And that's why I think it's important in the modern era. We don't have to depend necessarily on religious dogma and all of that. Now, I'm very grateful for my own kind of Methodist Episcopal upbringing, because the church leaders I knew always walked the walk. They're all about love, mercy, kindness. But I know that other kind of aspects of our religious systems on earth have not always been so true to the message of the prophets. In fact, I'll just mention here in passing, there's a beautiful book that I highly recommend to people that addresses all this. It looks at the NDE as the gold standard. Near-death experiences is the gold standard for spiritual experience. And then it takes the 5 main religions on earth and compares them point to point with NDEs. The book is called The Essence of Religions. It's by Christopher Koppes, C-O-P-P-E-S. I highly recommend it. From my point of view, this world could move forward much more comfortably if we start relying on modern human experience in these kinds of journeys and use that to kind of discern what we think is reality. And it will help us focus much more on the power of love, mercy, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, those big spiritual features of life that help so many people come into a grounded understanding and oneness with this loving force that NDEers so often talk about.
Thanks, Eben. There's a nice question here from Alan. Do you think that our experiences in this life serve to increase a universal intelligence so that consciousness, as it moves between planes and bodies, gradually evolves?
Absolutely. In fact, what I came to realize, first of all, as as a neuroscientist, coming to appreciate the power of the mental realm. It's a layer of information assimilation and integration that's been in this universe since before the Big Bang. It was part of organizing the Big Bang. Our natural laws emerge from that kind of intelligence, that mental layer of the universe, but it's in a process of growth and understanding of itself. That's what we're all going through. That's why sentient beings have access to that mental layer of the universe. One of the greatest lessons from quantum physics is that everything that happens in this world occurs from that mental layer. That's why the founding fathers of quantum physics all harped on nothing gets behind consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental in the universe. And it's because it is. And so that's why I would say this kind of understanding is so important. And I realized early on, I read Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's book, The Phenomenon of Man, which I think is a very powerful book in answering this specific question, because he was a scientist and he was very spiritual. He was a French Jesuit priest. He was a paleontologist. So he was a scientist who looked at long time scales, billions of years. That's what he was used to. And what he, in the mid-20th century, wrote about in this book is he saw the debate, in science of Darwinian evolution on Earth in biological systems. But he was wise enough to realize there's much more evolving in this universe than just, a few little chemical biological systems on this planet. He recognized that all of knowledge of consciousness was evolving. And that was right around the advent of quantum physics. So he was just beginning to glean the power of that. It's taken us the better part of a century to really kind of hammer that out. But the reality is, it's like that old saying, all politics is local. Given my belief that the entire universe exists for sentient beings to make their choices and in a learning, teaching fashion, interacting with others to grow into a higher form of consciousness, that's what this is all about. That's what all of us are doing. And just like all politics is local, just as all evolution of consciousness throughout the universe is nothing more than individual sentient beings coming into a much richer understanding of their own relationship with others and with the universe at large. And so I would say that is, know thyself, as is written on the entrance to the Temple of the Oracle at Delphi in Greece. And that's what we're all doing. But when you realize know thyself, when your mind is essentially the mind of the universe, that's what we're having to come to know.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question, Alan. Julie is asking, do you get any sense that prayers are heard? Is there any point in prayer?
There's absolutely tremendous point in prayer. There are two books I would refer you to get started on this from a medical viewpoint. They're both written by my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Larry Dossey. One of them is called Healing Words, okay? And that's a very good general assessment of prayer with some amazing stories. And you won't come away doubting the power of prayer after you read that. The other one is Be Careful What You Pray For. And that book is all about, we're not necessarily careful enough with our thoughts. We think they're private. We think they're our own. We think they're only fleeting and momentary. But our kind of thoughts and actions are very important in kind of our soul journey. And you find that often not only your actions, but even your thoughts are reflected in a life review. So I would say that prayer is an incredibly powerful modality. For me, I often talk about meditation. I use sacred acoustics, which is a form of differential frequency brainwave entrainment. We describe a lot in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, why that's so powerful, how those differential frequency sounds are interpreted in the lower brainstem, which is very different from every other sound you've ever heard that's processed in very recently evolved circuits up in the neocortex. And that makes a big difference. That's why something like sacred acoustics can be such a powerful tool for helping separate conscious awareness from the here and now and sense of self. But for me, centering prayer, which is a form of non-supplicative prayer, centering prayer is basically kind of a thy will be done prayer, invoking a trust in that force of love, that God force at the core of the universe. And so I would say every day I'm in the process of centering prayer and deep meditation using differential frequency, sacred acoustics, tones to help me get into a deep meditative state. And I think you'll find, especially if you read those books and start doing more literature, I know that there's a Robert Koenig, Koenig at Duke Medical Center, my old stomping grounds, and he's written some other beautiful books on prayer and the scientific validation of the power of prayer in the modern world.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we just going back to one there from Mim. Mim is asking, can you choose to have a break between lives? For people who have taken big, people who have taken on big work in a lifetime, can they choose to rest? She feels she's in real need of a rest. Is it her choice?
I would say, from my perspective, absolutely. That I mentioned earlier that Indra's net vision I had of the interwoven threads of lifetime, and I talked about how it was very much like breathing in, out, inhale is down here in the material world, exhale is between lives, and we get all the work done down here. This is where our souls grow, through learning and teaching and living these lives. But between lives is where we get that course correction, the life review, the reuniting with souls of departed loved ones, and then planning next incarnations. And I believe, it's just wide open. Whatever someone, soul needs is granted to us by the universe. But it's all in that process of progressive kind of ascendance towards that oneness with the divine. And again, some of the visions I had in my journey of civilizations far beyond our civilization just showed me that this journey of consciousness is immense, far beyond our wildest imagination, but it's all towards that goal. So, in other words, in this discussion of reincarnation, it's not like, for example, a Buddhist interpretation that might be that it's a wheel of suffering and the goal is to get off of it. As I discussed in my second book, The Map of Heaven, this is much more about a form of grace, that grace of God that enables these journeys to be working towards that oneness with the divine. And they're about transformation and metamorphosis. And if a soul needs a break between lives, to me, it makes perfect sense that that's all built into the process.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Eben. I'm just skipping on to a question by Becky, because I know Becky. Hi, Becky. And she's asking, do you think that even though we have free will, that some things in our lives are planned for us, such as husband, wife, children, etc.?
Well, there are several clinicians out there, psychiatrists who have studied, past lives, transpersonal psychology, all of that. I'm sorry, I heard somebody.
I think somebody has got their mic on. Perhaps if everybody mute their mics, please. Yeah.
I think someone's having an NDE.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we were...
I'll repeat the question. Do you think that even though we have free will, that some things in our lives...
Yes, okay, I got you. And yeah. Yes, very, very important point. And these clinicians have done work, for example, I would say it started with the work of Carl Jung and his notion of the collective unconscious. We need to mute that.
That might be Paul.
It is, it's Paul. Okay, Paul stepped away. There you go, good. So, getting back to the question, but they, I've got to regroup here. Paul got me off.
I'll repeat the question, Eben. It's very.
It's about the free will. I'm getting right to it.
Yeah.
My train of thought, though. So, what these like Rob Schwartz and so not just Carl Jung, but Stanley Groff, Michael Newton. They've talked, Rob Schwartz has written about this extensively, about a soul contract, this notion that with our soul groups, we plan our incarnations. I believe there's a lot to that. And so, for example, in looking back on my life, I believe that, for example, that I was given up for adoption when I was 11 days old. I mean, those who have read Proof of Heaven will realize my adoption abandonment wound was a huge part of my journey. much of my life. I did not feel worthy of love, and that was a huge kind of trauma for me to try and overcome. I'm sure that was a huge reason that I had my NDE, because it helped me tie all those threads together beautifully. But what I've come to realize that those hardships in life, and another one for me, for example, would be the fact that I stopped drinking alcohol back in 1991, very early in my neurosurgical training. I realized on my nights off, I was a little too dependent on scotch. And so I quit. And, to me, the blessing was that I was put up for adoption. Not that I found my birth family 54 years later. The blessing is that I was born alcoholic and had to deal with that and had to go through that struggle and grow through it. That's the blessing. And what I think is happening here is that in these soul contracts, I believe we pick certain hardships and we pick the roles that we will play. And, one life it might be parent and child, and then an inversion of that in the next life. But it just depends on the lessons to be learned and taught. But I think that there's a lot to this notion of the soul contract, and that we pick those kind of milestones to mark a pathway, but that many ways the choices we make at any point will then determine a whole new set of alternatives. So I believe that the challenges and hardship in life, and that certainly includes illness and injury, in many ways mark a path forward, but it's our free will decision of how we respond to those challenges, in living them, that allows our growth and transformation, our learning, our resilience, our ability to learn and teach some of these lessons. So that's where I think the free will is operative. But I would say that kind of it's a free will of the higher soul to kind of predetermine what those challenges and hardships would be. Because essentially I came away from my journey seeing that all of the real growth in life is through facing the challenges. And how do we do that? The last thing you want, if you're a true soul journeyer, is to win the lottery and sit around on your yacht sipping champagne. You get nowhere. We need the hardships. We need those blessings. So they are to be embraced.
Well, I think all religions say that. The key is suffering, isn't it? We need to learn through suffering.
Well, but there's tremendous enjoyment that can come to life in resolving, going through all this, and that of course includes that suffering, but it's a tremendous joy and bliss that comes from an understanding and from a sense of higher soul progressing and actually growing. And always it benefits from sharing love and compassion and kindness with others. So that is what makes all that suffering worthwhile, is when we can share it in a very loving fashion and realize we're all in this together. The more we can help others, the more we're helping ourselves.
Paul, just to let you know, I did mute you because we did get some interruption from you when you left there, so you'll have to unmute yourself again. But Liz,
okay.
I know Liz is Zach. Liz, you're Zach, I know. Has got a lot of questions, but she was the one that had the worm eye view question, and she says each worm eye view is a reflection of the ego. If you have shame, and feel as if you have made choices that may prevent you from entering heaven, you will experience a form of hell. Hell doesn't exist, but your earthworm view does. Can you follow that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sense and truth to that. And like I said earlier, much of my work back in 2011, when I was first getting into meditation with various groups, was we were trying to rescue souls from that kind of purgatorial level, which I would say, yes, it's like my earthworm's eye view. So I think that makes sense. I mean, this discussion of the ego and kind of higher soul is very important. I find in meditation all the time, I'm letting my ego voice state a request, make an intention, what have you, early in the meditation, but the ego voice goes into timeout. And that's when I start writing those sacred acoustics tones. And that's my way of then reuniting with higher soul, which is far beyond an ego level of interaction. And, the ego yes, it does serve some minimal purpose here on earth, but in our seeking spiritual advancement, the ego is just an impediment. I know from addiction and alcoholism work, the ego, you have to sacrifice the ego just to allow a rebirthing of the ego with a much more kind of generous connection with a higher soul. So that whole ego discussion is is certainly one of import. And I think a huge part of my meditative experience has been to develop a relationship with my higher soul through that veiling function of the brain with that primordial mind.
Brilliant. So apologies for that. Did you all hear me singing or something? Is that what happened?
A little bit of singing. It was beautiful. Lost my train of thought.
I have this mic clipped to me and I just think I can nip out and I forget that I'm still connected to the call. Okay. So I really like this, right? There's one here that's an interesting topic. And it says, it's Zach again, I want to talk about, but it's an interesting topic about material objects. Are there any books that focus on material objects being sent to Earth that Eben can recommend? There is a word for that, isn't there, Eben? When something materializes from the other world here. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I don't know if I know a label for that. And I'm sorry, I really don't have a broad knowledge of material objects sent from the other side. I mean, an important concept to get here, and this is something we discuss in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is this notion of the supreme illusion. And the supreme illusion is basically an admission that everything that I've ever seen, heard, felt, all my sensory modalities, all my thoughts, my interactions with other people, all my traversing of this world, as much as the brain and mind are incredibly clever at convincing us that it's, all out there, never has it been out there at all. Every bit of it has been constructed within mind. Okay, now not within the brain, but within mind. And I think that's very, very important, because what it does is it kind of opens up our mind to, what we mean by this material realm and what we mean by overlap between the material and the spiritual realms. Because ultimately it's all derived from the spiritual mental realm. And we see this world out there projected. But one of the most important lessons of quantum physics in the modern era is that there is no objective physical world out there that is independent of the mind of the observer. So if you're going to talk about an object that appears here in the physical universe, and you're making a claim about it originating in kind of the spiritual and mental aspects of the universe, that is in alignment with much of the way things work anyway. I mean, one grand example would be Joseph of Cupertino, a well-known, he levitated. He was a monk who lived centuries ago. And he was witnessed by thousands and thousands of reliable witnesses. The Catholic Church did a tremendous investigation, and they found that everybody was seeing the same things. This guy in meditation would be floating around and levitating around. And, it's because it all originates in the spiritual and mental world. And we are just beginning to learn the power of that being an adept. In spiritual studies, you'll find that there are those who are very advanced meditators who can easily enter your mind and know exactly what you're thinking. And I've seen many examples of that. So that mental space is wide open, and it's the thing that interconnects all of us and interconnects us with that God force. So ultimately, it all has its origin in those spiritual and mental levels. And then it's just a question of how do things actually get presented then into this world as a physical reality. And I think that just depends on the power of the adept, and that what we're just beginning to get here. If you read the book Real Magic by Dean Radin, I think you'll start seeing kind of the power of these spiritual journeys as documented and analyzed in this kind of scientific materialist world, and realize we're on the verge of some tremendous growth in our understanding of human potential. But it's another reason why we have to be very careful moving forward, because it's all about love, kindness, compassion, mercy, and the higher good. And anyone who wanders into that territory trying to use that power for any kind of darkness or against others, I think they're going to run into horrific problems, because that doesn't fit in that spiritual universe.
I think that's so positive, Eben. That's such a wonderful thought. And I'm sure you're familiar with Bruce Lipton and the biology of belief and all his work with
Yes,
placebo,
absolutely.
etc. Yeah.
I love Bruce's work. We presented with him several times.
Yeah, he's just fantastic as well. There's a question here from Barbara. Do you think that NDEs might have a positive influence on the urgent recognition of climate change?
Well, absolutely. In fact, I feel that all of the events of the last many thousands of years, and especially what we're seeing now in certain conflicts, war in Ukraine is an example, the political polarization that we've had, a lot of divisiveness between old allies and parties and et cetera. A lot of that is this giant kind of recoil. And in many ways, I would say the giant elephant in the room, when we look at, say, for example, COVID and more than 5 million dead around the world from COVID over the last 2 years, and economic collapse that was associated with COVID, those challenges are teeny little child's play in kindergarten compared to the giant gorilla in the room, I would say, and that is climate change. Climate change is an absolute emergency. We must come together. It's all about overcoming some of our prior problems. For example, I would say that the false sense of separation that comes from materialist thought, that we're all separate objects and the game is to figure out how those separate objects interact and all that. That's a very damaging mode of thinking compared to a much more unified, quantum-informed, NDE-informed version of consciousness where we're all coming out of one mind and sharing the one mind. We're all in this together. And it's high time we got beyond the incredible price we paid for that illusion of materialism and false sense of separation. And examples I would give there would be corporate greed, oil companies, and the wealthiest 1% having more than the bottom 40% of the economy, this incredible disparity of economic wealth, of power, of political power, of military power, every bit of it. And then when you add on top of that, our addiction to fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels and biomass, both of them, anytime you're putting CO2 in the atmosphere or letting methane escape, you're contributing to the problem. And we've already gone over the edge of the cliff. In fact, every single scientific report you read on the climate is much worse than the one a year or two earlier. Because we're so ignorant, we've stumbled into this incredible problem. And it literally is now 30 to 40% of species of animals, insects, plants on Earth are threatened with extinction. And it's due to human-caused climate change. It's an absolute emergency. For me, every bit of this is exactly what I expect. That is this awakening that I've been talking about for 13 years, since my coma, is happening. And it also involves a great sense of free will. That materialist science that pretends we don't have free will. It's chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain. It's an illusion that you're conscious. Wrong. We have free will, and it is high time we expressed it. Now is the time. And it's the planet's very future hangs in the balance. Our children, our children's children, when you start reading the reincarnation literature, and anybody who needs a source, go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. If you need a selfish motive for addressing climate change, just look at the fact that more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children that have been investigated by that group, 1,700 of them have been solved. That is, they found the previous lifetime that the child is reporting. So in other words, the scientific evidence for reincarnation is overwhelming. Don't be doubting it. Just because we have program forgetting and that most children beyond age 5 or 6 don't remember it doesn't mean we didn't live before. That's what transpersonal psychology is all about, is acknowledging past lives and how they influence this life. Well, for the selfish people out there, I'd remind them this evidence for reincarnation is so strong, there's some aspect of you that's going to be living through the misery that this planet is going to be if we don't do something very soon to stop climate change, get rid of our addiction to fossil fuels, get into sustainable energy. It's absolutely imperative that all leaders of the world, I'm very disappointed in the recent summit meeting because all I saw was more of the blah, blah, blah from political leaders and corporate leaders. In fact, the energy companies had way too much representation there. The energy companies need to take ownership of this. They need to take responsibility for getting out of fossil fuels and start developing sustainable energy. Any energy company that doesn't do that is simply contributing to the death of this beautiful planet.
Just before, Paul, you asked the next question, just to say, Eben, that I was on that website looking at the University of Virginia, the Department of Perceptual Studies. I highly recommend that to everybody. There are some amazing conferences and interviews, and one of the interviews is with Jim Tucker, who is, I think, the world authority on past life experiences, reincarnation, and his case histories are absolutely fascinating. And I think he talks about 2,500 cases, and you're saying 1,700 have been linked to their past life
that they've solved.
Absolutely incredible. So University of Virginia, the Department of Perceptual Studies. Okay, over to you, Paul.
If I could I say one more thing? Mm-hmm. And this is just for those who might not have heard, there's another tremendous resource in the modern world about the afterlife and reincarnation, BigelowInstitute.org. I won't say a lot more. It was a contest held last year. There are 29 award-winning essays available to the public for free right now, BigelowInstitute.org. It'll answer, read those 29 papers and you will know a tremendous amount about the afterlife and reincarnation and the proven existence of those facets of human life.
This is very intriguing. Barbara is saying that she's had experience of material objects being sent from the beyond with a message for her. So I just want to throw that in because that's kind of
beautiful. I love it.
We might have to get Barbara on to tell us all about that at some point. We'll do another seminar.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. But there's a nice question here, and just to ask, have you had any heavenly experiences or similar since the coma?
Well, yes, I have. And in fact, if you want to find out how my meditations generated that kind of experience, read the story in Living in a Mindful Universe where I encountered my father 2.5 years afterwards. My father's, he had passed over 4 years before my coma, obviously very important in my life. He was a leading neurosurgeon, very spiritual, very scientific. And my first encounter with him in meditation was a mind bender. It was an absolute return to those beautiful spiritual realms. In fact, it helped me to come to a much deeper understanding of my NDE journey because of the clues that he gave me about his participation in that NDE, even though, as he put it, he could not be apparent to me during my NDE. Because as he told me, if he had been, in spite of the 1 in 10 million diagnosis of E. coli meningitis in an adult, in spite of a 1 in a billion recovery, if my father had been the one I saw there, I might have been a little more tempted to think, well, it was way too real to be real. Maybe it was a hallucination, no matter what all the other evidence. But that's why my spiritual guide had to be that guardian angel, someone I'd never known in life, but was very important to me in life. As those who've read Proof of Heaven will realize, that guardian angel came to be identified 4 months after my coma. So, very good.
Okay, Eben, another question here. How has your experience affected or changed how you are in your personal relationship since you have recovered?
Well, I would say there's been a huge flip in this understanding of oneness and connectedness. A much deeper sense of kind of intuition and empathy with others, not just with, friends and colleagues, but really with people suffering and going through all kinds of things around the world. I feel in meditation, I have a very strong connection with them and an ability to bring some healing. It's just been extraordinary. And plus, I will tell you that often now when I'm with people, or even just thinking about people I know and my encounters with them, I'll often have this kind of vision of them as a very young child, all the way back to infancy, and then all the way into advanced age or to their leaving the physical plane. And I kind of see them as this oscillation of a higher soul that is here learning and teaching. And it's this beautiful sense of kind of eternity and a bigger kind of vision of kind of journey that we're all on that now just comes very naturally to me just in my kind of day-to-day dealings and kind of understanding. And it's a really beautiful way of seeing people because you see them for all their kind of frailties and warts and hairs and everything, and yet the beauty of the inner spiritual essence is something that shines through as I see people like that. So it's just a whole different way of kind of interacting with, and also in my own mind, kind of sensing the soul journey of individuals and how it all contributes to this beautiful kind of synthesis of shared journey.
Beautiful. That question was from Alan, was it, Jane?
No, Alan's got one now.
Yeah, okay. Alan is asking if we can gain any sense of where we are on the evolutionary consciousness journey, where this leads. The process of rebirth of consciousness helps the earth, our collective humanity here. I assume this is occurring on trillions of worlds, many of whom will be billions of years advanced in consciousness.
Right.
Than we are currently. Interesting question.
Well, it is, but I think it just points out that we are all participating, you know, in this evolution of consciousness. And the other thing to remember is that as humans, we do not have infinite abilities of understanding. Even though mind and getting into the mental realm gives us tremendous abilities of kind of vision, creativity, and understanding that goes far beyond just following the logical dots of our linguistic brain and rational mind. That's why meditation can be so powerful in creativity and insight, because it opens the door wide to a different mode of knowing. But it's false to think that humans have infinite capacity for understanding. And another thing that I think is crucial to point out is that the safest assumption about the unknown is that it is infinite, that there is no end to this journey of discovery, evolution, transformation, coming into higher knowledge, and contributing to this evolution of consciousness itself. So I would say we really have to kind of look at our limitations, but also realize that there's tremendous potential that often goes beyond our beliefs. And that's why our beliefs are so important. You know, in medical science, we've come to realize that belief, thought, attitude play a tremendous role in healing. People have cured their own cancer. People have cured advanced infections. They've cured their congenital anomalies through beliefs and understandings. Anybody who wants to know more about that, go to noetic.org, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, and put in the search term spontaneous remission. You'll get a book they put together in the mid-1990s, more than 3,500 cases of people with healing beyond any medical intervention, but it shows you the power of belief. And our beliefs can also be very limiting, especially the false beliefs of the paltry and bleak fiction of materialism that pretends that the material world is all that exists, we are birth to death, nothing more, the brain creates consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is a belief system that can be most limiting, and we need to open our minds and widely open those beliefs in what is possible. And that's where I think we can truly contribute to this evolution of all of consciousness.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. And I think that we are doing ourselves a lot of damage by our smartphones and our attention span becoming so fast nowadays. Young people, everybody's got smartphones, and when we talk about meditation, but that energy that we have to heal ourselves is all part of, you know, of concentration, focus, and meditation, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's one of the greatest gifts of meditation is kind of, I would say, all physical, mental, and emotional health is ultimately spiritual health.
Yeah.
In that use of the word spiritual, there are only two requirements. One is this notion that we're all interconnected with each other, with you know, all sentience throughout the universe, with that God force. And the other is that there is a sense of meaning and purpose to it all, that it is all truly going somewhere, and that we're on a journey together, a journey of discovery.
Yeah, and I think we have to surround ourselves with positive things and try and avoid all the bad news that comes out all the time. Not to be unaware, but we are rather bombarded with a lot of negativity.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anyway, a question here from Sinead. Do you think we have to set out our lives before reincarnating, or before incarnating, she says?
Do I believe that there's some kind of soul group and
Yeah,
soul
do
contract
we have
and
to-
planning?
Yeah, do we? I mean, I think she's asking, do we have to plan before we reincarnate? I don't know if you can answer that.
Oh, I think we do. I think, you know, that, as I referred a little while ago to the writings, especially of people like Michael Newton, Rob Schwartz, Brian Weiss, I think there's a tremendous, you know, planning that goes in. And again, I would say that the roles, the kind of relative power of the roles in terms of parent-child, you know, romantic lovers, people that interfere with other relationships. I mean, all those roles, I do believe we kind of generally lay out there before our incarnations. Again, there's a lot of flexibility because much depends on what choices we make given these particular hurdles that we face in life. And you know, each choice point can lead to new possibilities in terms of the other challenges we face. But I think in a broad sense, especially from the writings of people like Rob Schwartz, Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, I would say that there's a major sense in which, yes, there is something of a soul agreement that we make before we come into this world.
Paul, do you want to add anything there? I think we've run out of questions.
Oh, we never run out talking to this man. We've so much we can touch upon. Eben, so some of the things that stood out for me when you were talking at the beginning was the butterfly wing, the pure love. But the one thing I really like is the idea of that the oneness of everything, you know, that there is no separation. And I just want you to touch on that a little bit, that the whole world at the moment is really fueling this idea of separation. And you have been in a place where you saw and felt the interconnectedness of everything. And when your guide says to you that the love, you have nothing to fear and this boundless love is there for you, can you maybe riff on that a little bit for people, because what we're going through at the moment is quite disconnecting. So maybe
yes, well,
that reminder.
What I'll point out is that religious systems have had, you know, more than 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years to teach us the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. That's written into the fabric there in those life reviews across all belief systems, continents, and millennia. I think the universe, in watching, you know, this process of a prophet or mystic and then a religion coming out of that, and then other church fathers kind of manipulating the orthodoxy and all, that's where I think we've gotten into some trouble. And religions have not necessarily brought the purity of message of the prophets of love, connection, oneness with God, and all of that. So the universe got a little tired of that arrangement in the 1960s. Doctors were able to develop techniques of cardiac resuscitation. So before that time, before the 1960s, pretty much everybody who had any kind of cardiac arrest died. Since that time, there have been tens of millions of people who have been resuscitated, who have started this journey, the natural journey into the afterlife, but then they've come back. They were brought back. That is not an accident. That is because the universe in many ways is upping the ante now for us to grow. That has to do with the climate crisis, with the war, with all the conflicts. It has to do with our joining a much higher club. As I mentioned in Proof of Heaven, I had visions of advanced civilizations. In fact, I think a huge part of this current awakening in consciousness is because there are advanced civilizations that are interacting with us now. And in fact, we can't join that club because right now we're barely barbaric cavemen coming out of the caves with clubs and banging each other over the heads. We need to grow up. Homo sapiens is not so wise as they think. It is high time that all of this happen, this growth, this understanding of oneness. In fact, I think the reason the Bigelow contest happened last year, those BigelowInstitute.org essays, when you read them, you will see there's no longer a scientific question of, is there an afterlife? Is there reincarnation? No, the facts are there. Of course, afterlife is real. Of course, reincarnation is real. Of course, this spiritual journey we're talking about is what is our human reality. And the universe is forcing that knowledge on us, because I think Homo sapiens, for all its claims of wisdom, has been woefully inadequate. And boy, are we showing that now with Putin's insane, barbaric, criminal attack on Ukraine, with all of the crazy posturing in the world, with the political polarization. Every bit of this, and as we've said, the climate crisis, the corporate greed, every bit of it is a problem that has arisen from that false sense of separation out of materialism, this notion of oneness, which is absolutely essential and critical and right there at the cornerstone of the modern emerging science of consciousness, quantum physics. Every bit of it is about oneness and about how we're in this together. And we must help each other. And this corporate greed, the kind of things that are leading to climate change, we must, as individuals, humanity, rise up against it all. Not only that, the madness in the Kremlin right now shows us without fail that as human beings, all of us will rise up after we can resolve this Russia-Ukraine thing and get rid of nuclear weapons. They have absolutely no purpose on this earth. Mutually assured destruction, or MAD, is the only kind of outcome if we really let them get away. And it is up to all of us, because this is not a battle between nations, between tribes, which is what autocrats will try and tell you. They will drum up that tribal fever. But actually, it's autocrats, dictators, military power mongers against the world at large, against all human beings. And all humanity must rise up against this insanity, get rid of all these nuclear weapons. The United States, China, and Russia must start denuclearizing now. I'm sure it won't happen in the current Russia-Ukraine situation, but when we get out of that, we must all get rid of the nukes. They are anti-human, anti-consciousness, their insanity made manifest. And it really is time for this world to grow up, for some true wisdom to come into the way we treat ourselves, the way we act, and the way we view our destiny.
Yeah, and I think 99.9% of people are totally in agreement with you there. It's just a few despots that...
Well, that's what needs to change. And the people at large have tremendous power. I personally believe what's going to happen in the Russia situation is the Russian people, who are not, willfully behind the horrors that we're seeing in Ukraine, because they're being lied to. But it's Putin and his people. And I suspect that the Russian people within government, their military, they will end up somehow removing Putin from having that power. And the rest of us need to support them in that effort, and support all of humanity in getting rid of any future possibility of another madman like Putin potentially threatening the use of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, indeed. And I just have probably a final comment here from Greg. Can you talk about what kind of meditation you recommend and find most effective?
Well, it's something, differential frequency brainwave entrainment. I use it every day, an hour or two. If you want to learn more, go to sacredacoustics.com. Now, full disclosure, the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics is my life partner. She is also the co-author of my third book, Living in a Mindful Universe. She's been a tremendous spiritual mentor to me. She's also been instrumental in developing the technology of differential frequency brainwave entrainment. As I said earlier, it's very powerful because of how it intersects with the brainstem and influences the brainstem, and that is what allows our conscious awareness to go free. If you go to sacredacoustics.com, there are free downloads there. In fact, there's a peer-reviewed medical study published in February 2020 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, where Dr. Anna Yusim in Manhattan, in a busy psychiatric practice, showed a reduction of anxiety over 2 weeks of 26% in people using Sacred Acoustics versus only 7% in people who had standard psychotherapy. That in itself, that pilot study, is a profound peer-reviewed example of the power of Sacred Acoustics as a therapeutic intervention. I use it for deep spiritual journeying, and the workshops we teach are all about that. So that would be a great place to start. It's just a very profoundly useful technique, and share it with your friends, because the more all of us can get into deep meditation and connecting in the spiritual realm, the better we can do to help this world at large.
Beautiful. Jane, did you see there was a question there from Barbara about the Alzheimer's question? Did you see that?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe just get, if you wouldn't mind, Evan, just maybe as quick an answer as you
Sure.
can. We are getting close to finishing. But
All right.
Barbara is asking, might there be a way of offering consolation to a sister who has Alzheimer's, that there is a place towards which she can choose to go?
Yes, there is. Alzheimer's is a tragic disease. You know, when you look at it, I've had relatives with Alzheimer's. It's just a tragic thing to live through. Certainly have known about it in patients and their families. The reality is that something like 5 to 10% of Alzheimer's patients will actually show what's called terminal lucidity or paradoxical lucidity as they come close to death. And what that involves, I gave one example of terminal lucidity in my book, In Proof of Heaven, but it's where someone who is progressively demented will wake back up. Their memories come back. They can converse with the loved ones at the bedside. It often happens within hours or a day or so of death, but it's incredibly refreshing and liberating to people who witness it. It also happens in other forms of dementia, but what it is a way of showing us that in many ways, Alzheimer's patients have one foot in both worlds. They're in the spiritual realm, but they're also here. In fact, there's a beautiful book I can recommend. It's by Elmer, I think it's Elmer Green. He was the head of biofeedback in North America, a physicist. He wrote, his wife had Alzheimer's. His book is called the Ozaki Book of the Dead, Ozawkie, Ozaki Book of the Dead. And it's all about his interactions with her and how he came to realize in many ways, once he kind of liberated himself to be with her in her mental space, he came to realize that she was a teacher, and that, you know, the Alzheimer's moments where she would be a little more kind of with it, but combative and apparently confused, in many ways when he could communicate with her there, he came to see a way that she was teaching him things. So I think it's a good book to give people an alternate view of Alzheimer's and what those people are going through, and helps us to understand spiritual journeys that can look very kind of disturbing from the material realm, and yet we get glimpses that in fact they are living a life that is in many ways spiritually rich and much better than what we would interpret from our witnessing their behavior just through the Alzheimer's. So I think just several useful thoughts that kind of help in dealing with that tragic disorder.
I hope that was helpful, Barbara. I'm sorry I bypassed you there. There's just another part to Greg's question, and this will very definitely be the final question, Eben, because I know you've got other things to do as well. He asks, why do the large majority of people who die return with no experience or memory to report?
I just think the failure there is in memory. As I've said, there is a programmed forgetting. In fact, to me, it's surprising that people are allowed to have an NDE and then come back with all that knowledge. You know, because when we're born, we come into this world, we have all that knowledge of between lives that can be retrieved as memories from a child. And you just read Jim Tucker to get all of that and how that works and how common it is. And yet, I think the reason that those memories are not necessarily allowed is that much of the process of growth of this, transformation and learning of that primordial mind that is trying to grow and learn and teach through all of this process involves that program forgetting. So that if we came into this life and had full knowledge of higher soul between lives, every lifetime we've ever had, we obviously wouldn't make much progress in this lifetime. We make the progress because of the dumbing down, because of the intentional forgetting. So to me, it's kind of amazing that 1 in 5, which are kind of the numbers that you run into out there, 1 in 5 cardiac arrest patients will have an NDE or some aspects of an NDE. That's quite common. And to me, that's a much more surprising feature than why don't the other 4 also come back reporting it. But I think it has to do with memory. We know, for example, that infants who have NDEs or who have a death experience, a challenge of some sort, and they're resuscitated and come back, or young children, they can have a profound NDE that they don't even remember at that time. What happens is much later in life as an adult, they have a hypnotic regression or a meditative session or another NDE, something that allows them to remember it. So the interesting thing is not why don't they happen more often, but what about the memory? Because I think it's the memory of it that is, for whatever rules this universe works by, it doesn't always allow us to bring these things back in. And I would say that my assumption is the majority of people who come close to death actually have an NDE, but they just may not necessarily remember it. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to go through. And in fact, my own interpretation when I came back to this world, before I had regained all my neurosurgical, neuroscientific knowledge, and before I'd investigated just how ill my brain was and how impossible it was for that brain to come up with any kind of dream or hallucination, I said it was way too real to be real. Those are the words I told my son. He was majoring in neuroscience at the time, Eben IV, in college. And I said it was way too real to be real. To me, early on, as somebody who experienced it, who was just now wowed by the whole thing and coming back, and beginning to glimpse my previous life, I was thinking, wow, what a thing to go through. But there's got to be some incredible neuroscientific explanation for that. But that's when I then started uncovering just how ill my brain was. I didn't know how ill it was initially. And that's what amazed those guys who wrote the case report. Oh my God, that's what amazed the people, the peer reviewers who accepted the case report. My God, people do not come back from this. But there are other cases of spontaneous healing of miraculous nature in the setting of NDEs. It's all the more reason to study NDEs. For example, Anita Morjani, she had a stage 4B advanced lymphoma, down to 85 pounds. She was in coma within hours of death when she checked into a Hong Kong emergency room in February 2006. She ended up making a beautiful recovery and her cancer disappeared. Or Dr. Mary C. Neal, orthopedic surgeon. She had an over 30-minute warm water drowning during a kayaking accident in Chile in the late 1990s. Profound story. You can't explain that. Any doctor who gets to the medical details of these stories, they say, no, they didn't have a recovery that we can explain. But you can explain it. You can explain it because of the spiritual journey. And that's where the power of prayer, where our understanding a placebo effect of those spontaneous remissions I mentioned, miraculous healing in NDEs. This is all about the power of our mental space, of our will, of our higher soul. That's why all of us benefit tremendously from learning much more about this, from meditating every day and learning as much as we can about these kind of cases. Go through that bigelowinstitute.org set of papers and start really going deep into your life in meditation, centering prayer, and then start living it. Because we don't do all this through meditation. It's about living these lives. So we bring those lessons back, and that's where we share this love, compassion, kindness, and help all of our fellow beings.
Eben, you're a total inspiration. I think that's
Beautiful.
a wonderful way to end. Thank you so much. That was really a brilliant evening. And I hope we'll have you back again, I hope.
Well, good. Well, thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful joy being with you tonight, and I thank you. And yes, I look forward to another conversation. So maybe we can do this again sometime.
Beautiful. Before we go, Jane, I'm just going to mention the next event. Yeah, is that okay? We'll mention it now.
Okay, Eben, if you want to check out, Paul's going to talk about other events now. So thank you so much. That was
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Eben.
Blessings to all.
Take care.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. So folks, before you go, I'm just going to mention that I'm going to do another event with Jane. We're going to do another one together. It's April the 9th and it's Dan Millman and it's in Dublin. And we'll have it online, but we'll also have a live option as well. So I'm going to have Dan on a big screen and we'll do an interview with him and also have a Q&A, very similar format. And it's on 7 p.m. on Saturday, April the 9th. But we'll let you all know by email and stuff. Okay.
And I actually, Paul, actually, I have an event tomorrow night with Dr. Connie Zweig,
go ahead.
talking about aging as a spiritual practice, and she's a very interesting lady as well. So you can check that out on Seminars.ie, and that's tomorrow evening.
Brilliant, brilliant.
So thank you all very much for coming along, and
Thank you for organizing this.
all right.
It was
That's
brilliant.
Zach Acker Lisa.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Send us your Groucho mask.
Yeah, not going to happen now. I'm out of
Thank
the
you all
closet.
very much. Bye. Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Peace,
Bye-bye.
guys. Take care.
Bye.
See you, Jane. See you, Maura.
Bye.
Bye-bye, love.
Bye, cute little
See you,
Irish.
Becky. See you, Emily.
Bye, Jane. Bye, Paul. Thanks, Emil.
Bye,
See you,
Becky.
Becky. Take care.
Bye.
Brilliant. Wow, he recommended some amazing books. Like you could.
Yeah, I put some of them in the chat, but well, that's all on the recording anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, you'd really go and read them, wouldn't you? Like it's
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
It
and
actually-
also, but
Yeah.
Paul, that website, the University of Virginia website is pretty amazing.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
I mean, the stories there about near-death experiences and about reincarnation are unbelievable. And he's right. We're becoming much more aware of all this. You know, in the past, we wouldn't have been aware of any of this stuff happening. But it's all opening up now. And let's hope that the more it opens up, the more the world will become a more spiritual place, as he says, you know?
Yeah, he went off on a great one at the end about the separation, didn't he? The oneness. It was really passionate the way he spoke about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved that the monk de Chardin. We are spiritual beings having we are spiritual beings having a human experience rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and I think that's important to remember, actually, isn't
We're
it?
not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're
Yeah.
spiritual beings having a human experience, and that's the monk de Chardin or de Chardin, whatever. Brilliant, a brilliant perspective, I think.
Have you read that book, Jane?
Which one? Oh no, I
Pierre
haven't. No,
Chardin.
but I just know that is a very famous saying of his. Yeah,
For those of you who are still on there, you're listening to the backstage chat here with me and Jane.
yeah. I'm sure they don't mind. Now, Paul, I just looked at my diary, and I'm away on the 9th, but I could do it on my phone.
Yeah, well, you know what I was thinking, actually, that I might have you on the screen
Okay.
with Dan, so you can be an online and I'll be there live in the elbow room.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd have
Is
to do it on my phone because I'm away that
Are you down in
weekend.
Connemara or where are you going?
No, I'm in Biarritz, actually.
Very nice.
But I
Okay.
presume I'll be able to get internet and everything. I'm staying with my sister, well, my partner's sister. So
Could
that
you
should.
bring a laptop with you, or?
Yeah, I'm sure she'll have a laptop. I'll
Yeah.
ask her.
Yeah, and we'll
Yeah.
just send you the link and we'll do it like
Yeah.
that. I'll send you all the details tomorrow because we've already set up all the payments.
Yeah,
for
and I'll
tomorrow.
put it on my site. So shall it be booked through you, will it?
Yeah, it'll be booked through me, and I'll send you all the details on Dan and everything, the photos
Yeah.
and everything.
Okay.
That'll be a good one. He's a new book coming out. He's a bit of a profile, hasn't he?
Yeah, no, I think he has. I think he'll be very
Yeah.
good. I
Yeah,
think he'll be very
brilliant.
good.
I'll let
Yeah.
you go. You probably want to have your dinner, do you? So
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks, Paul, and
That
I'll
was brilliant.
let you know what the numbers are, etc.
Brilliant. I think we did. You're happy with the numbers, are you? Think it went